Democratic governor of Minnesota signed the Democracy for the People Act into law, an attempt to make it easier for people to exercise their right to vote in the state of Minnesota. This is a good piece of legislation. And I want to take it as an opportunity to discuss what blue states should be doing in the midst of the wild legislation we're seeing be proposed and passed in red states. And essentially, it's stuff like this, but we'll talk about that more after looking at the news here. This is from CBS Minnesota. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Waltz on Friday signed the Democracy for the People Act into law, a sweeping bill aimed at expanding access to the polls that includes long sought-after provisions from voting rights advocates. The legislation implements automatic voter registration, allows 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, and creates a permanent absentee voter list that will automatically send people who sign up a ballot each election. The proposal also requires voting materials and sample ballots to be in languages other than English and prohibits voter intimidation at the polls, among other provisions. And then another thing that apparently GOP lawmakers are not happy with was a provision that would require more advocacy groups behind political ads to have to disclose what candidates or issue they support or oppose. And another would limit foreign influenced corporations the ability to donate to campaigns or make independent expenditures. So great bill. And then we'll also get to a bit of Governor Tim Waltz speaking about this during the signing of the bill.
What are the objections with getting people registered to vote? I search everything to try and figure this out. Why are you in? We're not telling people how to vote. We're not telling people if they have to. We're just making sure that the process to get them registered is easy and get them in there, and then we're going to encourage them. We know when people register to vote, they go vote. And we know when more people vote, the democracy is much more representative, and you get the results that the vast majority of folks want to get. This is a great bill. The folks who made this happen, I can't tell you, and I think all of us know, and we just need to name it. Against a backdrop of where the elections were questioned with no evidence, against a backdrop of people tried to stop the counting of the electoral votes, it's more important than ever that we shore up this democracy. We shore it up for the people of Minnesota, we shore it up in this country, we show the rest of the world. The world's oldest and strongest democracy is strong. Minnesota is doing our part by making it stronger today, and this piece of legislation is just the exact type of things that Minnesotans asked us to do. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for the folks.
He is exactly right. And you all know how I feel about the Republican Party. But one of the things they're really good at is branding. Because I have people who aren't even that conservative who hear things like automatic voter registration, which is government agencies registering you to vote if you are an eligible voter and you interact with them. So you go to the DMV for something, they'll go ahead and register you to vote unless you opt out, but it takes the work off of you. But even some centrist people I've talked to will hear that and go, oh gosh, no, that doesn't sound right. But then you dive into the details and people realize, oh yeah, why wouldn't we want the process of exercising our right to vote to be easier? The states that have had this system don't have issues with voter fraud other than the handful of cases that are present in every election in every state all the time. So it's a win-win. You still have secure elections and you make it easier for people to exercise their right to vote. But Republicans have successfully convinced a lot of people that voting just has to be this long, burdensome process, specifically in areas they think will vote Democratic, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can change the system and make it easier for people. And I do also like that Tim Waltz mentioned the assault on democracy by MAGA Republicans, not specifically naming them, but calling out the questioning of elections and how that emphasizes how important it is for Democrats when they have power to shore up democracy. Also credit to Tim Waltz and Democrats in Minnesota, by the way. They recently, something we covered, Tim Waltz signed into law the universal free lunch for K through 12 students. So kind of on a roll there in Minnesota. Now, the general point on this, right now, as we talk about regularly, we are experiencing an incredibly extreme part of the Republican Party. While MAGA and the right-wing extremism isn't all of the Republican Party, it is, as I call it the engine of the GOP. It's what's driving the agenda and the actions of the party. And so one of the repercussions of this is the radical legislation we've seen in state legislatures across the country in red states, whether it be anti-LGBTQ legislation, anti-abortion legislation, breaking down democratic institutions, or weakening gun laws. Extreme stuff is taking place. And that's all stuff we talk about a lot, you're quite aware of. But what does that mean for democratic governments in blue states? Tim Waltz can't do anything to affect the actions of DeSantis, for example, in Florida. But I do think the radical nature of the GOP should be a motivator for reasonable state lawmakers to act accordingly, because this is the moment for Democrats to make the contrast between the two parties as clear as possible. We hate that this is the moment we're in, but because we are, let's make that contrast clear, and letting it be known, not just through words, but through actions, that Democratic governance yields better outcomes than Republican governance. Let the American people see that while communities in red states are becoming less safe because of the gun laws or lack thereof, and rights of women are being stripped away, democracy is being broken down, and LGBTQ people are being targeted. While all of that's happening, Democrats in states that have majorities in their legislative bodies should be protecting rights of women and should be expanding healthcare, passing gun laws, protecting LGBTQ people, etc., etc. That is what people need to observe in this moment, so that if they're in a blue state, their life is actually improved. Awesome. And so that the entire country can observe the contrast. If the GOP is going to act aggressively and urgently to do incorrect actions in red states, Democrats, as they should always be doing, but especially now, should be acting aggressively and urgently to do correct actions in blue states. I know what I'm saying sounds super simple, but too often Democrats respond to radical Republicans totally wrong. Meaning they'll kind of go, okay, so Republican lawmakers are playing to a radical part of their base. That means some of their voters may not be happy, which is true. But then that'll leave them to believe that the way to win is to win over those disaffected Republicans by sort of being a little bit conservative themselves and not doing anything that would be seen at all as progressive. It's not the way to go. You lean into these issues, not radical, super far left, unpopular things. Lean into the popular progressive actions and show people what good progressive governance looks like. And so many of these progressive policy positions, whether it be protecting abortion rights or universal background checks for firearms, are incredibly popular among the American population. So it would be also, in addition to good policy, good politics. Last thing I'll mention on this, getting back to the specifics of the bill that Tim Waltz just signed into law, critics will often respond to actions such as this one by saying, this is just an attempt to help Democrats in the state of Minnesota. And it'll be in kind of this, something spooky's going on. And here's the deal. It's true. It just is that making it easier to vote in most states will end up helping Democrats. But that's not because of all of the malicious reasons that Republicans tell us about. That's because the country just is a majority left of center country. The only reason Republicans have the amount of power that they do currently is because they have selectively made it harder to vote in places that tend to vote Democratic. And of course, gerrymandering as well. This is why out of the last 8 presidential elections, 7 out of them have seen a Democrat win the popular vote. So the more you have democracy be accessible, the more the actual voice of the American people is able to be heard, and thus the more left of center politicians are able to win elections. And the fact, Republican politicians, that the idea of it being easier to vote is bad in your mind says a lot about you. You aren't against these policies because you think it will make fraud worse and make our elections not secure any longer. You're against these policies because you know that your positions can actually win among the American population.